We were sorry to see you go back in the day, but we appreciate you and continue to pray for you every day. If you have your Bible, I hope you have it open to Ruth chapter 2. Now, many times, it's very difficult to go through one verse, and I read a series on how to do expository preaching without doing it verse by verse. And so today we are going to do a bunch of verses, but you can't look at them independently. You got to see them as a complete literary unit. So we're going to go ahead and start off talking about the meeting. If you have your Bible, we're going to be in Ruth chapter 2, beginning in verse number 8. Then Boaz said to Ruth, "Now listen, my daughter." Now this word here for daughter is a very unusual word. It doesn't mean my biological daughter. It just means someone who is a younger woman, someone who is of marriageable age. He has already known all about her marriage and her husband's dying, how well he has taken care of Naomi. And so he is not saying you little girl. He is just saying someone that, as a father, I would want someone to care for my daughter in this exact same way. This is how I'm caring for you, as if you were my daughter. Now, I want you to notice, he doesn't say my sweetheart. He doesn't say, hey, babe. And so many of us think that this whole book of Ruth is nothing more than just a relationship building of a guy who looks at a girl and says, wow. No, this is a guy that looks at a girl who has done so much for her mother-in-law, has done so much to leave the city of and the country of Moab, and to follow after a God that she doesn't know, that he looks at her not as what she looks like, but who she is in character. I could easily say this: I had a dream that every day each person will be looked at not by the race or gender that they are, but the content of the character of their life. I still have that dream. And so we continue by taking a look at these verses. Then Boaz. Now, I want you to notice the order that this is going to happen. Boaz, first of all, if we go back to verses 6 and 7, he has already talked to his workers. Now, we're going to find that out as we continue to read, because he goes up to her and knows her whole life story. Now, how does he know that, since he had never met her before, never seen her before that day? He found all that out in that short meeting with the worker that we read about last week. Boaz speaks to the workers first. And then he goes way beyond the letter of the law. Now, what does it say in Leviticus Chapters 19 through 24? If you are a widow, if you are an orphan, if you are of an alien culture, then you have the right to go to the four corners of the plot of ground and actually pick up what the harvesters have left behind. And they were by law mandated not to go to all the edges, to leave that so that the people who were down and out would have something that they could go out and have a meaningful source of employment and a meaningful life of enjoyment by having actually worked for and brought home the seeds, if you will, of their labors. Come on, somebody's got to get that. Okay, thank you. Well, nice. Okay, here we go. Goes beyond. And so notice the first words that he says to her. Then Boaz said to Ruth, "Now listen, my daughter. Do not glean in another field, or leave this one, but keep close to my young women. Let your eyes be on the fields and the field where they are reaping, and go after them. Have I not charged the young men not to touch you? And when you are thirsty, go to their vessels and drink. And the young men have drawn, basically for the harvesters. This is not meant for the gleaners, but he is saying, I'm bringing you into the fold. Go to there." And then she fell on her face and bowed to the ground and said to him, "Why have I found favor in your eyes that you should take notice of me?" We're going to talk about that word notice in just a minute. "Since I am a foreigner." But Boaz wrote all of that off and said to her, "All that you have done for your mother-in-law." Notice, he already knows. Even though he just met her that day, he already knows. "All that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told to me, and how you left your father and mother in your native land and came to the people you did not know before. May the Lord now repay you." Now, the first thing he says to her is, may you be blessed by God. I know the reputation of who you are as a person, what you have done. He is not saying that she's right with the Lord. He is not saying, all right, she has read the 4 spiritual laws and she's made the prayers. but she has experienced the reality of God's spiritual law and has experienced the abundance of his goodness for the down and outer and for the foreigner. So he says, may the Lord repay you for what you have done. A full reward be given you by the Lord. The greatest thing we could ever do, and I think Will just said this, is to make sure that we seek to place a person under the providence and providential care of the Lord. And you know, sometimes the hardest people to do that with is our family. I can remember that after I fully experienced Jesus Christ, it was so much easier to share with anybody and everybody but my mom and dad. Anybody know what I'm talking about? So much easier to share with anybody and everybody because they knew what kind of a brat I was as a kid. But I think because of how much of a brat that I was as a kid, when they saw the change, and we'll talk about that as we continue. You see, Boaz saw the change, that she was in character and conduct. And as he saw the change, he saw that it would be more than just a better lifestyle, it would be a better eternity. Now, there are a lot of people that live a great lifestyle. I heard one person say one time that money doesn't buy happiness, and the response was, well, I just wish I had enough money to rent it for a week or two. Money does not buy happiness. And what we need to do is to seek to place everyone else under the providential providence and protection of the Lord. Let's take a look now at the meal. Begin reading with me in verse number 14. And it says, and at mealtime. It just so happened to be lunchtime. Now remember, she's been working there all day. And this is more than just lunch. This is the evening meal. And so, remember last week we talked about the fact that she worked all day except for the short break that she took? Now it's actually mealtime, where they would actually dispense with any work, and it's mealtime. I want you to notice. And at mealtime, Boaz said to her, she probably had nothing to eat. Remember, she went into the field that morning with nothing. Most people would go with a little something. Scholars disagree on whether or not you could actually say she went there with nothing in hand. But most of them agree that whatever it was not enough. It was not enough. She probably had nothing to eat. So Boaz steps right in, and at mealtime, Boaz said to her, come here and eat some bread and dip your moist morsel into the wine. So the first thing that he says is, here, I am eating with my workers. I've heard so many people say that if you're in leadership, you should never have a close relationship with the people that work for you. And I say, I don't believe that. You know, maybe the familiarity can breed contempt, but I think if, as pastor of this church, if I was to say, well, you know, I can never eat with any of you because familiarity breeds contempt. I am dying for you to invite me over. I'll give you a whole list of things I like. And so Boaz, the first thing that we see is he apparently eats with his leaders. Jesus ate with his disciples. Jesus said this, that I will not eat of the bread again or the drink of the fruit of the vine until we what? Until you do it with me in the presence of my Father. God wants us to have a festival, if you will, a wedding reception in heaven. God wants to experience communion, even of the bread, with us. And so the first thing that I see that reminds me a little bit of Jesus, and hear me, if you can't see Jesus in this passage, you are spiritually blind. And so all of a sudden, he eats with his harvesters. Then he invites her over. He says, come here and eat with us. Come over. And then he says this, and then he invites her to dip the bread. Now, why would they do that? Most of the bread, and especially in barley season, might have been the barley loaves, but were small and hard. Now, they were much like a pescate, but harder. They were the kind of things that if you needed to chisel up some cement, you might use one. It's sort of like my biscuits. And so, you know, if you ever see the ones you go click, 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 and you go, how in the world would you eat that? And then they would bring out this vinegar and wine situation, and they would dip it in there until it was soft enough that you could actually eat it. But that was reserved mostly for the people of the upper echelon. So here she is, a foreigner and a gleaner, and he is sitting with his workers. He invites her to come over and join them, and then says, here. You know, sometimes in a world full of battle-hardened unbelievers, they need to be softened up a little bit. And the one thing that can do it is when you offer to give them something that goes way beyond the friendship that softens the heart. So he invites her to dip the bread. This is shocking. First of all, you don't do this for foreigners, much less for a foreign what? Lady. Lady, remember the hierarchicalism of importance was the husband, then the male children, then all of the animals, and then after that the daughter, because you could sell her off for the dowry rights, and then the wife was the lowest one in the echelon totem pole. And here he is, a person with no wife, no connection, no money, no food, but he has heard about her conduct of character, and he invites her over to dip. This is shocking everyone. He served her. And notice, so she sat beside the reapers, and he passed her the grain. He served her. It's like when our elders go around and bring to you the elements. He actually serves her. He was taking care of a woman. How many times have we heard it, that all men want to do is wait to be waited on? Godly men do not wait to be waited on. They wait on those who are in need. We become the waiters. We don't become the people waiting to be waited on. And this was shocking. Can you imagine that all of a sudden, if you were out buying bread for Jesus and you come back and Jesus was talking to a Samaritan woman? How shocking. We go out of our way not even to put a foot on their parcel of property. And Jesus is there talking to her. And then he says, I have food. And it was just shocking. Jesus was always shocking people because they were going by the letter of the law rather than the love of the law. And so he was shocking. He showed everyone that she was going to be protected. And then she ate her full and was satisfied. And she had some left over. But when she rose to clean again, Boaz instructed the young man, you leave her alone. And as you glean, make sure you pull out the full heads, not just the morsels in the edge, but pull them out, lay them in the order so that when she goes by, she will have to trip over them. Now this word here for abundance is the word in Hebrew azvah. And azvah means more than just abundance. It means to have so much you need a to-go bag. And later we're going to find out that she takes the abundance that's left over and she puts it in a pouch. And the word here for abundance means to be so full that she wants to take a nap. Everybody ever feel that way? Everybody ever go to lunch and you eat after lunch and you turn the television on, the next thing you know, the Cowboys are already lost. Sometimes you just got to use the right illustration. You know? It means to be so full that you don't even feel like going back to work. And she takes this to-go bag and she packs it up. Now we're going to discover later that she gives it to Naomi. Because guess what? If she came to work with no food, that means Naomi stayed home with what? No food too. With possibly no food too. And then he ordered the harvesters, you take care of her. You leave stalks. Notice, Boaz instructed the young men, leave her glean among the sheaves and do not reproach her, and also put some of the bundles out of yours and leave it to her to glean, and put it right in front of her. And then this last word is, and I don't want to hear about any physical, and I don't want to hear about any verbal abuse. Now remember how they greeted him last week? He walked up and he said what? May the Lord be with you. And they said back to him what? And maybe the Lord be with you as well. Now remember, that doesn't mean that they were spiritual people. They just knew that if God blessed the boss, chances are the boss would be willing to bless the employee. And so they answered back. And then he warned them, no abuse. No abuse. You see, this is a love story, but it's not because boy meets girl. It's because God's love meets a needy young lady. It's a love story of God. Let's take a look at M&M's. Now, I don't know about you, but I know that M&M's, first of all, stands for the memory, and then we're going to talk about the majesty. If you have a copy of the handout, you know that's exactly what M&M stands for. Let's continue reading. So she gleaned in the fields as we continue. So Ruth goes ahead and gleans in the fields until evening. Now, after working all day, then she beat out what she had gleaned. Now, the word there for beat out literally means to thrash. And what would happen is there would be all the husks, and then there would be the meaningful. Anybody ever take a peanut and break it open at one of those restaurants where you can get the peanuts up, and then you're expected to just wipe off all the peanut shells right on the floor? Anybody ever been in one of those restaurants? It just bugs me. It just bugs me. I don't know why it bugs me, but it just bugs me. I do it because everybody else is doing it. But in order to get to that peanut, what have you got to do? You've got to make a mess. You've got to bust up the husk. And sometimes in order to get to the meat, isn't that what the seed of grain is called, the meat? In order to get to the meat, sometimes you got to break through the hard husk. You got to take the time. It takes time. You get dirty. It's not easy doing ministry. People's lives are messy. But if you're going to get to where the meaningful meat is, you've got to be willing to put in the time all day harvesting and then put in the overtime to thresh. So she gleaned in the fields until the evening. Then she beat out what she had, and it turned out to be an ephah. Now let me just say that in Hebrew, this can mean anything from nephew to friend to foreigner. And there's no systematic, this is exactly how much that is. Some people believe that an epoch was much like a cubit, depending on who was in charge, decided on what the standard element was. But many people believe that it was, if you take a 5-gallon jug, it would fill up about 5/8 of a 5-gallon jug. Now, regardless on whether or not we will ever get to the point where we will all agree whether it was 22 liters or 5/8 of a gallon or whatever an epoch would matriculate out to today, it's a huge amount to glean in one day. That is a huge amount to glean. Now, if you were a harvester, that might not be much because you're going right smack dab through the middle of the field. But if you're a gleaner, you're only supposed to be getting what's left over on the edges. And for you to glean an epoch, wow! That was a huge amount. And so when she comes home, she goes ahead and talks to Naomi, and she shows Naomi all that she has had, and she goes, whoa, where did you glean? Look at verse number 19. Where did you glean today? Where have you worked today? Whoever it was, bless the man who took notice of you. Where were you? Now this word here for take notice is the word nachad. And it means more than just to see that you were out there. It means to see that you really needed something that only he could provide. You know what the New Testament equivalent of that word would be? Agape. He loved her. Because what does the word love mean? The word love means for God so agape the world. That means God took a look at what the world needed and took a look that he was the only one that could put the sheave out that would save. And so God in his one and only Son made sure that as he brought you into his field, how did she know whose field belonged to Boaz? She didn't know. She had heard that there was a kinsman redeemer, a close relative that lived in that town, a Goel. But she doesn't know which one of those plots of ground is his. She just goes to work. And God, in his invisible sovereignty, made sure she got the right place. Made sure that Boaz just happened to show up. And after Boaz shows up, his heart full of compassion for lost people, alien people, widowed people, orphan people, he went out of his way to notice what her need was. Not to notice what she looked like, but to notice the content of the character of her heart. And he went out of his way. And so Naomi says, where were you? What were you doing? How did this man take notice, not of your physical attributes, but of the character and conduct of your need? This man went way beyond the letter of the law. It says, bless the man who took notice of you. So she told the mother-in-law whom it was, and she says, what was his name? It was Boaz! Now, think about this. The chapter started off by saying there was a man who was of the tribe of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. She already knew that he was there. She already knew what his name was. She had no idea what he looked like or no idea where his field was. And she said, let's just hope we bump into him. And that very day, she doesn't bump into Boaz. God bumps into them together. What a great God we serve. Now the other side of this, now of the M&Ms, is the memory of the day and then the majesty. What is the majesty? Naomi makes 3 statements. Let's take a look at this. May the Lord bless him. Now let me just tell you this. She is not saying this so that she can continue to get. The workers in the field say, may the Lord bless you too. What she is saying is, may the Lord bless him for what he already has done for us today, even if he never does another thing. I've had a lot of people say to me, may the Lord bless you. And my answer always is this, even if God was to never do another thing, he has already done more than enough for me. You see, if I'm waiting on God to do one more thing, then what I'm saying is the cross isn't enough. The cross is enough. And God is not going to withhold, because he is not someone that is jealous of his possessions and jealous of his spirit and jealous of his goodness and blessings. God will never withhold. He will always be abundantly there. He is wanting to do exceedingly abundant beyond all that we ask or think. But even if God was to never do another thing, let me just ask you, is Jesus Christ enough? Is Jesus Christ enough? And so she says, may the Lord bless him. But she goes to another step. And she said, it was the Lord's, what? It was the Lord's care for you. And this word here for care for you is the word chesed. It means it was the Lord's compassion. God took you to the exact field at the exact right time, to the exact right relative at the exact right day. Remember, it's the beginning of barley season. In other words, everything is working out. Now, there was a famous TV show and a movie that says, I love it when a plan comes together. But let me just tell you, in God's mind, he loves us and makes the plan come together. Before the foundation of the world. Did God know that this was going to happen before he ever said, let there be light? Absolutely. And finally, you would say in God's lineal history of the planet Earth, he could say the day has come. The day has come. I knew it, I saw it, I lived it, I felt it, I planned it, I promoted it, I conducted it, but today on Earth, it came true. We do live in increments called 24-hour days. God lives in limitless eternity. And so in his limitless eternity, he can see our day-by-day struggle and say, I knew this day's coming. Today's the day. Today's the day. And she says, may the Lord bless him. And it's because the Lord has blessed. And he is a blesser. And then she goes on to say this, Boaz is one of. He doesn't say that he is our kinsman redeemer. She says he is one of our goels, one of our near relatives. Now we're going to discover later in the story, I better not tell you. It's a spoiler alert, so if you don't want to listen to this, don't listen. But later in the story, there's another man who's actually a closer relative. And because this man is a godly man, he doesn't say, well, let's sneak it in before he finds out. How many of us would do that? How many of us have maybe gone to Walmart and noticed that something was mismarked and say, let's run up to the cash register before they find out? How many of us would go and say, hey, I think this has been mismarked? How many of us have been given wrong change and taken it back in? You see, people of character do things that are right, even at their own expense. And he is one of. Now that's going to come up in a couple of weeks. Now, most likely Ruth is completely clueless as to what this means. He is a kinsman redeemer. Remember, she comes from Moab. She's a Moabite. She has heard of this thing called a kinsman redeemer. But that doesn't mean just because you have heard of something that you know what it means. There are a lot of people, how many times in a moment of tragedy, somebody will look at somebody and say, I'm praying for you. And then I have asked people, well, what does that mean? What's that mean? Well, I'm wishing you all my best thoughts and hopes. I'm thinking of you. Let me just tell you, those are wonderful sentiments. That is wonderful empathy and sympathy. But in reality, all it is I'm thinking about you, but I'm not going to do anything. But think about you. You see, when God thinks about you, he takes the next step, and what does he do? He orchestrates your life so that he can do something for you. Let's not forget that although the word love many times in the Bible is a noun. It is a noun that demands verbiage, action. Because love as a thought is just sentimentalism. Love as agape is doing what's done. For God so loved the world that he thought about it. Now, for God so agape the world that he what? He did action. It was a verb. It was a noun in thought and a verb in practicality. Love has got to be an action. Now, Ruth may not have any idea what's going on right now, but notice what she steps up and says. Then she steps up. So she said, now, he told to me, this is what he said to me. It's a good thing, daughter, that you go out and young the women. She says, lest in any field you be assaulted. So she got close to the young woman of Boaz, gleaning until the end of the barley season, and even to the end of wheat season, and then she lived every day with her mother-in-law. So Boaz told her, whatever you do, you watch my workers, not the gleaners. He is saying you are no longer a gleaner, you are now one of my employees. You work for me and I work for God. You're no longer an alien. You're no longer just a widow. You're no longer just a number on a roll that can go out there to the corners by the letter of the law. You now are going to be working smack dab in the middle of the harvest, and I'm going to allow you, whatever you harvest belongs to you and doesn't belong to me. Boaz says, you stay close, not to my gleaners, but to my workers. He goes on to say this, and whatever you get, you can go ahead and keep. And so what does Naomi say? Great plan! Well, that sounds good to me. That is a great plan. Because if she could get 5/8 of a gallon as a gleaner, what do you think she could bring home as a harvester? In other words, when we decide that we will go into the harvest fields because truly the fields are white unto harvest, but the gleaners are few, that we will reap much greater reward than we could have possibly thought about. So she says, great plan. I like that plan. Not just because of what she was going to get, but because she was wanting God to bless Boaz. She was noticing and realizing that the only reason this is happening is because God has been kashed. He has been compassionate. He has blessed them. And because why? Because this is a family member. And did you realize this means for 7 more weeks? You see, most people think that this happens one night, and then the very next night, the next thing happens. No, when we go to chapter 3, 7 weeks goes by. She finishes up, what does it say? She finishes up barley season, and she finishes up what? Wheat harvesting time. And so this is the beginning of barley season all the way to the end of wheat harvesting season. And so many times we just think that this is just one of those love at first sight, the next day, the next day, the next day. Have you ever seen someone and you didn't see them again for 7 weeks? There is nothing in the story that says that they saw each other every day. There is nothing in the story that said it was love at first sight. There is nothing in the story that says, and he went home that night saying, oh, I can't wait to see her tomorrow. Everything in the story is every day she just got up and did what God expected her to do. Years ago, Will was here and he was speaking to our youth when we had our youth group. And one of the questions came up was, how do I become a missionary? And I will never forget what Will said. Make sure you live every day right now so that you don't do something today that would prevent that from happening years from now. You become a missionary today. You may not be on the foreign mission field, but you don't wait to become a missionary. You are a missionary until God provides you a means to move you into a different mission field. Well, that was the best piece of advice our young people could have ever received. Let's do some life application. Here we go. Here's the first one. The one thing a man or a woman needs. The one thing every relationship needs. Whether it be with son with his mom, whether it be boy with a girl, whether it be a father with a daughter, the one thing every relationship needs is the person in charge of that relationship is to have the desire to keep the Lord first priority. You want to be a great godly dad or be a great dad to your daughter? First of all, keep Jesus Christ your first priority in your life. You want to be a great son to your mom? Keep Jesus Christ your first priority. You want to be a great worker for your boss? Keep Jesus Christ first priority. No matter what relationship you have, in every relationship you have, the best thing you could do is to have the desire to say, I may be this, but my number one desire is to keep Jesus Christ my first priority. In this relationship, in every relationship. Life application number 2. In every relationship, be known as a giver and not a taker. What can I do for you? Isn't that what agape really means? What can I do for you? For God so took a look at what our needs was and we couldn't meet them. So God said, what can I do for you? I'll give you my son. So have the reputation, God is a giver. He is a great giving God. He is not a taker-demander. Be known for the conduct of your character as a giver, not a demander. Listen, in every relationship that you have, that I have. Number 3, never lose hope in the Lord. They may show a reluctance for a season, but never lose hope. Never lose hope. Never lose hope. In any and all circumstances, catch this. In any and all circumstances, and I could say it this way, in any and all relationships, would that be okay? In any and all relationships, God is still on the throne. Never give up. There may come a time when you get a call and say, Mom, may not be here long. So you go ahead and you write that card. You go ahead and say that the one thing that would make me most happy as your son is to know you have a real relationship with the one and only Jesus Christ. In any and all relationships and circumstances, God is still on the throne. Remember the words of St. Francis of Assisi. And you would say, I don't know if I remember this. Yes, you do. It goes like this. Always preach the gospel, and when necessary, use words. Always preach the gospel. Now, did Boaz, preach to Ruth? Did Boaz preach to his employees? He just was a man of conduct and character who followed the law of the Lord beyond the letter to the love of the Lord. And people recognized it, noticed it. And so in everything you do, always be presenting the gospel by the conduct of the character of your lifestyle. So that in some way somebody might finally come up to you and say, hey, what's up? How can you hear this news and not be thrown completely out of kilter? Always preach the gospel, and if necessary, use some words. Because I guarantee you this, if you preach the gospel in word and do not preach the gospel in conduct and character, it is a meaningless gospel. Even in discouraging days. Anybody ever had one of those? I call them sometimes bittersweet days. Well, I can remember the day my mom died. It was the day after Easter one year. And it was one of the best, worst days of my life. Knowing that my mom was in heaven made it one of my best days. Knowing that I'd never hear her say anything like, come on, pick that up. Put that away. Stop doing that. Back then, I used to let my hair grow out. And she would say, it's a little messy, you better come in. All those great things that made my mom my mom. And I will never hear her say them again. But I hear her say them all the time. My mom had a certain cologne that she wore. It was a mishmash of every flower that had ever been known. I called it Ode to Mortuary. Anybody ever been in a funeral where you smell all the different aromas of all the different flowers? And so there are still people that wear that, and as soon as I smell it, guess what? You know. So it could be a thought, it could be a smell, it could be a phrase. But in the discouraging days, in those days of bittersweetness, God is still seeking to reveal his plan, to bring his redemption through his son. And I'm going to use the Old Testament phrase instead of Jesus Christ, Jesus the Messiah. Jesus the Messiah. So what should we do? We should daily see the details of Ruth and Boaz as more than just a love story. But they seem to have little of God's cosmic plan working out. They were just going through another day. And so you should be looking for God's cosmic plan instead of just living another day. Tomorrow if you drive over the hill to work. Tomorrow if you go to clean a house. Tomorrow if you go out to do whatever it is that you go out to do. We should be looking and asking God, reveal yourself to me today. Don't let this be just another general revelation day where I just say, yeah, the sun, moon, stars are up, so God must still be okay. Reveal something up to me about you today. He is the master conductor and orchestrating his plan in your life and desire for you to use your life in some way to reach a Ruth so that you could be a modern day Boaz. And in closing, whatever it is, don't let today's struggles become your identity. Don't let today's struggles become your identity. God said this through his Son, Jesus Christ, in the New Testament inspiration. We are more than what? We are what? More than conquerors. Don't let today's struggles become your today and tomorrow identity. Let's pray together. Father, I pray that as we move on in this great love story, not just a Ruth and a Boaz, but you and us. Lord, help us to be people of conduct and character. Help us to be people that are in it for the long haul, gleaning until the very end of barley and wheat season. Not until we just think we have enough to get by. Help us to be people that are givers and not just takers, wanting the most for them. As you have said, love the Lord your God with all, and then love others as ourselves. Lord, help us to be people that truly are giving, not just giving the gospel, but living the gospel, and then giving it by the way in which we live. And Father, I know we all experience struggles from time to time, sometimes moment after moment. Father, help us in the midst of those struggles, in the midst of those bitter and sweet days, and sometimes the bitter and bitter days. Help us to remember that we should look up, for our Redeemer has drawn near. And help us to remember, I don't have to be the sum total of my failures. I can be the sum total of his triumph. And help me to walk in that victory in Jesus' name. Amen. Have a great day. If anybody has not met Will, please get over there and say